Emotional Judgment on the Dangers of Confusing Emotional Judgment with Emotional Intelligence by O.G. Rose. It is important to draw a distinction between emotional intelligence and emotional judgment. Emotional intelligence is empathetic and tells the hard act of thinking oneself into another person's shoes. It is an intellectual endeavor for the sake of achieving the proper emotional disposition toward other people and requires deep thinking. Emotional judgment, on the other hand, is the act of gauging the validity of a truth based on one's emotional reaction to it. The problem with emotional judgment is that it requires one to consistently experience a positive emotion in order to verify, justify, or appreciate experiences, ideas, and so on. Not only is the human body incapable of maintaining such a high and constant emotional level, but emotions are unreliable. Rationalism alone is also unreliable, for the rational mind requires the acceptance of premises before it can begin thinking, premises which often can neither be proven nor invalidated, especially first premises, say until attempted, which may be when it's already quote-unquote too late. Emotional intelligence can help an individual accept premises and interact with what cannot be rationalized, making one's intelligence more effective and true. IQ requires EQ, as EQ requires IQ, for a person to judge, feel, and think properly, efficiently, and meaningfully. Emotional judgment is emotional intelligence without IQ, and it's as dangerous and misguided as movements like positivism or scientism, which disregards emotional intelligence for IQ. Section 1. For the EJ, or the one who deals with emotional judgment tendencies, something is judged as true if a positive emotional reaction is felt upon experiencing it, while something is false if a negative emotional reaction is felt. Perhaps an emotional reaction is an indication of the directions one's judgment should head in, but it shouldn't constitute the whole judgment. The truth can be something a person doesn't want to confront, and if the person has EJ tendencies, the individual will conclude he or she is justified to avoid the truth, it making the person feel negatively, and thus the truth is perceived as false. Also, reaching the truth usually takes long periods of unemotional thinking and introspection, or at least it can, both of which an EJ is likely to avoid, feeling that such actions are unproductive. Yet, if given a chance, thinking and introspection might prove unproductive for an EJ if grounded in emotionalism, rather than empathy or facts, which can lead to analyzation, as there is no rational end to emotional thinking. Because it was done in a mode of subjectivity versus objectivity, or more so, having attempted introspection without results, this may seem to validate the EJ's suspicions. Consequently, the EJ may forego introspection, thinking it was given a fair chance, even though objective introspection is necessary for determining truth. Being one's own standard of judgment, it tends to be the case that an individual that is susceptible to emotional judgment will associate no emotional reaction with the negative. A lack of emotional reaction does not connote sadness, so the EJ will likely project sadness onto neutrality, a dangerous step. For example, if a child tells her mother that she had a good day at school and the mother doesn't feel anything upon hearing this, perhaps because she is busy with the dishes or so on, the mother could come to believe that she doesn't care about her child's day. The mother could then conclude that she is not happy that her daughter had a good day and could try to make herself feel happy, feeling guilty and blaming herself for not loving her daughter like she should. Yet trying to feel happy is often a futile effort, for feelings are organic. They are not readily chosen. Upon failing to feel happy, the mother may come to judge herself as a poor mother. Upon doing this, she may try harder to feel something, only to fail again. And if she does succeed, this success will only last as long as does the emotion. Due to her emotional judgment tendencies, the mother may enter a cycle of failure and set herself up for depression. It is vital to draw a distinction between feeling happy and being happy. One can choose to be happy, but one cannot readily choose to feel happy. If one chooses to be happy, the person will have prepared his or herself to feel happy when the emotion organically and unexpectedly comes. But the one who doesn't will find that all attempts to feel happy fail and are at best temporary. Feelings are like the wind, often coming and going, unable to be bottled up. One can only choose to put themselves outside for when the wind might blow. If one wakes up in the morning and thinks, today I'm going to be happy, it means today I'm going to feel happy, that individual has promised to accomplish something the person has no control over. This is a risky endeavor. Failure is probable. One never knows what conversations will arise, what tasks will come one's way, what a day holds can never be known until the day is over. If one believes that he or she must feel happy to validate the day, the person will in most days feeling like a failure. It is of the utmost importance that a person commits to being happy versus feeling happy. The first position takes into account the realities of life, while the second raises the bar too high. In a way, the second is an attempt to live by law instead of by grace. The first is to establish the law that I will feel happy instead of simply being. It is also important to draw a distinction between being and doing nothing, and to make clear that to choose to be happy is not simply to accept the status quo. Being self-aware challenges being, and if one is bent on feeling positive emotions, one will be overly self-aware. Judgments require objectivity, and the more self-aware an individual is, the more subjectivity he will or she will likely be. And do note, I am aware that full objectivity is not possible, but these are ideals we can strive for. This is because the person focuses on how he, she, and others feel, which is prone to suddenly change versus objective and constant truth. Feelings are also not a good foundation for empathy. Empathy grounded in reason is much more likely to put one in another person's shoes, per se. 2 times 2 equals 4 is easily relayed between individuals because it is a fact that remains true over time. There is little, if any, room for interpretation. Emotions are much harder to translate and prone to oscillate without warning. They are more temporal than timeless. Expressions like 2 times 2 equals 4 have a much better chance of being relayed correctly versus what is more emotive. In emotional judgment, subjectivity builds upon subjectivity as if objective, often constructing an entire system explaining the nature of a given situation without truth. The irony is that the system will, relative to itself, make sense and therefore seem to fundamentally validate emotional judgment. For example, a person who sees no emotional response from another will fear that the person isn't happy. Consequently, the EJ may ask questions, or act in a manner that makes the other feel uncomfortable. This will make the other appear unhappy, which will confirm to the EJ that their emotional judgment was valid. What you fear is what comes unto you. As what you feel, you can feel into reality. Often, the soft-hearted person is not solely after their own experience of positive emotion, but for the sensation that comes from knowing that others also feel good. This desire must ultimately be based on what the soft-hearted person has emotionally judged as a positive emotional experience, and he or she will naturally assume others desire the same emotional experience in the same way. If a soft-hearted individual believes another is experiencing a negative emotion, the person will emotionally judge that he or she needs to step in and make things right, for example, which is achieved when the other feels good. If this very act can be what makes others upset or feel awkward, if the individual were to judge their need to step in or act based on facts rather than feelings, these kinds of mistakes beget between subjectivities could be better avoided. Yet to the EJ, feelings are virtually facts, and identifying the difference between a fact and a feeling requires objectivity, which an EJ can struggle to have. This is why EJ tendencies can be so problematic. They trap the person within a self-justifying loop, which, motivated by good intentions, is hard to recognize, needs correction, and certainly not praise. Emotional judgment is contradictory yet prevalent. EJ is often behind the decisions between friends to keep the truth from one another in fear of hurting one another's feelings, and EJ is often behind the support for unsustainable humanitarian programs, to list some examples. The less EJ, the better, but risking IQ is only good in so much as it rises with EJ, but praising IQ, raising it up, is only good in so much as it raises up alongside emotional intelligence. Ironically, EJ can keep people from experiencing emotions objectively and fully. Section 2. For people to choose to be happy is for them to choose to open themselves up to authentic emotional experiences. People who are determined to feel happy have set themselves up to end up like a drunkard, always looking for another emotional gulp, focused on what will make them feel a certain way versus what things are, and taking pleasure in the being of those things. A person should enjoy a sunset not because it makes them feel joy, but because it is in fact a sunset. A sunset is wonderful because it is itself, not because it makes people feel wonderful. In a way, it is egotistical and controlling to believe a sunset is wonderful because I feel it to be, versus it is. The first statement implies the sunset is validated by and needs the viewer, rather than the viewer need raise his or her self and perception up to meet the wonder of the sunset. The same logic can be applied to art a viewer does not like. Like art, which requires distance from the viewer to be appreciated sometimes, emotions require distance, fashioned by reason for the feelings to be fulfilling. Order is everything. If feelings come before being, both can be lost, founded on ironic egotism. But if being comes before feelings, both can be actualized, the very thing the EJ, the emotional judger, longs to do. It is not possible to feel nothing, because there is no such thing as nothing by definition. When an EJ says, I don't feel anything, the person means, I don't feel what I want to feel in the way I want to feel it, or something like that. To be is to feel, and to feel is to be. One cannot be and not feel. Yet the two must be in the right order. Being precedes feeling. If one concentrates on feeling at the expense of who he or she is, then the person will lose both emotions and identity. It is a grave mistake for one to construct their identity on their feelings rather than construct their feelings on their identity. This is because once he or she stops feeling what one expects to feel, the person will feel like nothing, which is a contradiction that brings about despair, anxiousness, depression, anxiety, what have you. Existentialists have called this experience alienation and have identified that a person can avoid it by being on a hamster wheel, per se. If you never sit still, you won't have to face it. Considering this, emotional judgment likely contributes to society's unwillingness to introspect productively. Without objective introspection, there cannot be an understanding or development of one's identity as necessary for authentic experience and a foundation for feelings to be constructed upon. If one doesn't know oneself, the person doesn't know who feels, and their emotions will always be out of reach. An area where a lack of true introspection has clear and dangerous ramifications is in relationships. Physical interactions trigger emotions. Feeling a person stimulates feelings. A person with EJ tendency who also engages physically with another before commitment will likely lack a clear sense of whether this is someone with whom the person should be in a relationship. In fact, the EJ may pursue a serious relationship with someone totally destructive to the EJ, blinded by emotion, no physical stimulated judgment. Rational judgment should come before physical involvement. If physicality comes first, it becomes much harder and more painful to get back to objectivity. Sex with someone who is a person who is not committed to you can severely dull your judgment and make yourself believe the relationship is stronger than it actually is. Emotions on a firm basis for a marriage and physical activity will contribute to misjudgment rather than validate true love. Sex, however, that is based on full and rational awareness will likely bring about greater joy, have a better chance of it, of course. You can only love who you know, and though the word know equally implies the intellectual and the intimate, the intellectual must come first. The discernment must come first. Love must be thoughtful. Only those willing to die to their feelings will love others until death do them part. I love you means I know you. And in that expression, it's important to note that I comes first, which requires thought and introspection to define. There's a big difference between being in love and feeling or falling in love. The first never forgets what it has felt and why, while the second lasts until the emotion wears out. I love you signifies both a fact and a feeling, and each signification requires the other to have meaning. The longer an individual continues a relationship without a foundation, the more that person will likely want to avoid introspection and serious thinking about it, subconsciously aware that this very act risks ruining the relationship and causing emotional turmoil, which the EJ will want to avoid, naturally associating negative emotions and pain with quote-unquote wrong. This will tempt the individual to avoid the inevitable longer, which will cause more pain in the long run. The longer the individual waits, the more painful it will be when the individual does confront what must be confronted, which will make it more tempting to put it off, and so a vicious cycle begins, especially if the relationship is between two EJs, suddenly into engagement, then marriage. The irony of these kinds of situations is that usually the parties involved know something is wrong, even though everyone acts like all is well. When a person finally names the problem, it is no revelation. It can be a breath of fresh air. The truth all stared at, but pretended not to see, is finally present. Actually addressing such a situation, though, can be very painful, like removing a drug from an addict, which can make an EJ conclude persistence is wrong. However, if the EJ perseveres, freedom and authenticity will be better achieved. Another problem with the EJ mindset is that it doesn't motivate a person to act until he or she feels motivated to act. In the situation mentioned above, which crop up in everything from personal decisions to politics to economics. A person will not say what needs to be said or do what needs to be done until the person feels urgency or feels like he or she should. This is usually when it's too late to act. A person, to make a difference, must intellectually consent to the urgency long before the urgency is ever felt, if the person is to make any meaningful difference. An EJ, however, unless feeling motivated or emotionally justified, will probably not act. When the EJ does, what occurs will probably not feel good, which the EJ could then use as evidence that he or she should have never acted in the first place. Also, if a person does not act unless he or she feels motivated, and if that person inflates feeling nothing with not wanting to, when the person doesn't feel like painting, for example, the person may conclude that he or she doesn't want to be a painter. The EJ may then quit painting or never try to be a painter, as the EJ may abandon a business or so on. On the other hand, if a person acts because the person feels urgent rather than because urgency is needed, the person will be prone to make mistakes. Also, determining whether a situation actually requires urgency requires objective introspection, which is already touched on and the EJ can struggle to have. Urgency without introspection is problematic, and the EJ who acts when action will make things worse will be hard to get back down until the individual doesn't feel urgency. To calm down, the EJ needs to listen and think objectively, but feeling urgent, the EJ will find these kinds of activities to be the exact opposite of what needs to be done. Not only does an EJ mindset make an individual put off action until it's too late or act when it's better to wait, it also works against the person's constitution and determination to stand by their actions or statements. The person will always emotionally judge their non-emotional judgment as an error, and so be tempted to backtrack. If the decisions or actions of the EJ upset others, it will be tempting for that EJ to rationally conclude that he or she made a mistake and to apologize. If the EJ backs down, the vicious loop will continue. The more the EJ backtracks, the harder it will be to break the cycle. The EJ must die to their self, per se, to escape the loop and to develop the determination necessary to be successful and fully human. This is because the EJ self is constructed from feelings versus being, and that self must make way for a self of being. Feelings are to color one's identity, not be one's identity. If a person is told that something is wrong and that person in EJ does not feel as if it's wrong, the person will not necessarily listen to the counsel. Speaking with an EJ can be difficult because words have emotional charges that a given speaker, less emotive, may not grasp. The difference between getting an EJ support or acceptance could hinge upon saying, "I'm looking forward to it," instead of "I'll be there," for example. Ironically, individuals aware of the EJ paradox who are trying to explain it to an EJ may not be attuned to the words they're using, and so terms that make an EJ feel uneasy and lean the EJ toward feeling what is being said is wrong or even hurtful, those terms will likely be used. When the one trying to explain the situation gets frustrated, this will be further evidence to the EJ that he or she is right about her negative assessment. Perhaps an EJ reading this paper will conclude it is wrong because they feel that the paper is cold, thus proving the paper's thesis. Section 3. Thinking and feelings are not opposed to one another. Thinking is the foundation for feelings, and thinking without feelings is lifeless. It is not an either-or question, but a question of order. Being is first, the feelings of that being are second. This isn't to imply hierarchy, but rather to simply state a fact. The foundation of a house must come before the house. That's just the way things work. If I am happy, then nothing can take my happiness away. If I feel happy, it will last until I feel sad. If I am in love, nothing can take my love away. If I have fallen in love, it will last until I stand up. There is freedom in choice, but in emotion, one's freedom is controlled. If one freely chooses that which causes emotion, the loss of control will be an expression of one's freedom. One does not get both freedom and emotion the other way around. Authenticity requires freedom to a degree, without which one can never have the liberty to be oneself. Emotions can enslave unless they are secondary to being and identity. Subjectivity cannot be a foundation, but must be founded upon objectivity and be what objectivity undergoes. One can also be enslaved to the emotions of others. If a person needs, for example, others to be happy when he or she is successful to fully enjoy their success. Emotions are more gripping than ideas, even good ideas. They feel like they're in control and that they're supposed to be in control. Consequently, it's easy to give emotions power over our lives, but this temptation must be resisted. In the wrong order, emotions burden. In the right order, emotions make the facts of life alive. Choose to be happy rather than wait for it and miss out on life. Step outside of your emotions to truly find them. Live for truth, not feelings, and authentic emotions will come. Truth is the only thing that will set a person free, and liberated, a person is able to live without being a victim to the tossing and turning of emotions' oceans. Don't just feel happy, be happy. Don't look to the sensational for sense. Look to sense to sense. This has been Emotional Judgment by O.G. Rose. For more, please visit www.ogrose.com, and thank you for your time.